My name is Carol Whitmore, and if I had signed one paper just 5 minutes earlier, I would have handed over $800,000 to the very same people planning to throw me out of my own son's house. This is the story of how I wore an apron, smiled politely, listened when no one else did, and built a $1, $2 million stock portfolio without anyone noticing. And what happened when they finally found out? Well, you might actually regret missing this dramatic story. So before you sit down and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. I wasn't born into wealth, and I never aspired to be flashy. I always thought that being useful, being present, was its own kind of wealth. That's how I raised my son Nathan. With 2 jobs, a crock pot, and an iron stomach for life's disappointments. After my husband left us when Nathan was 8, I stopped thinking about romantic dreams and focused on practical survival. Teaching during the day and working night shifts at the local motel wasn't glamorous, but it paid for his braces, his clarinet lessons, his prom tucks. When Nathan graduated from college, I was the one in the back row clapping the loudest. Not because I needed credit, but because I knew how hard it had been to get him there. So years later, when he asked me to move in with him and his wife Vanessa, I said yes, with the same sense of duty that had guided every major decision in my life. They'd just had their second child, and Vanessa had returned to work. They said they needed help. I said, of course. At 64, I still felt capable. I cooked, cleaned, ran errands, picked up my grandkids from school, and even helped with homework. Every evening, I'd prep their lunchboxes while Vanessa was glued to her iPad and Nathan caught up on work emails. I thought I was being helpful. Invisible maybe, but helpful. Then I received a letter. It was from a pension investment group I had enrolled in years ago, back when I worked that second job at the hospitality group. Apparently, the compound interest had built up more than I realized. And now, I had $800,000, clean untaxed, all in my name. I sat with that letter for days in disbelief. I even checked the numbers with an accountant. They were real. My first thought was Nathan. He'd been talking about launching a startup, something in smart home technology. He'd hinted that the bank wouldn't give him the loan he needed. So naturally, I thought maybe this was a sign. I could gift him the money. He could pursue his dream. And maybe he'd finally see me not as mom, the built-in babysitter, but as a partner in his future. I didn't tell anyone yet. I wanted to wait for the right moment. That moment never came. Instead, what came were the little signs, the glances, the mutters under breath. One night, I walked into the kitchen and heard Vanessa say, "She's always in the way. It's like she's planted herself here permanently." Nathan didn't correct her. I backed out of the kitchen quietly. I didn't sleep that night. Still, I told myself maybe it was stress. Maybe she didn't mean it. Maybe Nathan was tired. The next morning, I still made everyone's breakfast. French toast for the kids, sliced strawberries. I slipped the pension letter into my cardigan pocket, intending to talk to Nathan that evening after dinner. But that night, everything changed. I had just finished cleaning up the kitchen. The dishes were done, the floor swept, and the kids were tucked into bed upstairs with their nightlights on. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet I used to treasure when Nathan was small. Back then, it meant I had survived another day. I held the envelope with the pension letter again, smoothing it with my fingers. I took a deep breath, walked down the hallway, and knocked gently on the door to Nathan's home office. He looked up, mildly annoyed, as if I had interrupted something urgent. Vanessa was sitting on the couch beside him, scrolling her phone. "Can I talk to you both for a minute?" I asked. Vanessa sighed audibly and set her phone down. "Sure," she said in that clipped tone that always made me feel like a guest in the house I scrubbed every day. I sat down on the edge of the armchair. "I've come into some unexpected money," I began. "It's a pension payout from my old job. 800,000. Nathan's eyebrows lifted. Vanessa sat up straighter. "I was thinking," I continued, trying to keep my voice even, "maybe I could help fund your business idea. Give you the capital you need to finally launch." The silence that followed wasn't surprise. It wasn't gratitude. It was calculation. Vanessa was the first to speak. "Wow, that's unexpected," she said slowly. "And generous." Nathan nodded. "That's amazing, Mom." But their eyes weren't looking at me. They were flicking toward each other, communicating something unspoken. I knew those glances. I'd seen them at dinner when they wanted to talk about something the kids weren't supposed to hear. I saw them again now. They weren't thrilled. They were strategic. I felt it like a cold wave across my shoulders. I haven't decided what to do yet, I added quickly. I just wanted to bring it up. It's not final. That changed something. Vanessa's smile stiffened. Nathan leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. Well, keep us posted, he said, voice flat. I left the room feeling like I'd made a mistake. I was halfway to the kitchen when I realized I'd left my cardigan and the pension letter on the armchair. I doubled back quietly. That's when I heard them. She's baiting us, Vanessa hissed, dangling it like she's the Queen of England. She's trying to stay here forever, Nathan said, making herself essential so we can't say anything. Well, you'd better say something, Vanessa snapped, because I'm done. I've been done. If she wasn't your mother, she'd have been out a year ago. Something cracked inside me. $800,000. Years of sacrifice. And this is how they spoke about me behind closed doors. I stepped back without them noticing, walked into the bathroom, and stared at myself in the mirror. What was I doing here? What had I become? That night, I didn't sleep. I laid in the narrow guest bed and remembered every missed vacation, every birthday spent cleaning, every backache from picking up after children who weren't mine. I also remembered the pride in Nathan's face the day he bought this house. Now I saw it differently. I realized they didn't see me as family anymore. They saw me as furniture, functional, silent, replaceable. The next morning, I acted like nothing had happened. I made pancakes for the kids, kissed them on their foreheads, and packed their lunches. But the pension letter didn't return to the armchair. It went back into my purse tucked inside my wallet, zipped and sealed. I also made a phone call to my old friend Deborah, who had just converted her upstairs unit into a rental. She said it was still available. I told her I'd take it. That night, after everyone was asleep, I opened my laptop and moved the entire pension payout into a high-interest account. Then I called my accountant and scheduled a meeting. My new goal wasn't to save Nathan's dream. It was to save mine. The next morning felt like any other. The kids were eating cereal, milk dripping down their chins. Vanessa was in her usual robe, tapping her phone screen while sipping green tea. Nathan was already in his home office, likely pretending to work while browsing sports blogs. It was a normal morning, but I no longer felt like I belonged in it. I packed the kids' lunches, my movements automatic. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even sad. I was deliberate. That afternoon, while everyone was out, I began to sort my belongings. Quietly, methodically. I had a system. What to take, what to donate, what to leave behind without a word. By the time Vanessa got home, 2 of my boxes were already in the trunk of my car. Going somewhere? She asked, glancing at them with a raised brow. I smiled. Just donating some old clothes to Goodwill. She didn't ask further. She never did. She had long ago stopped being curious about me. I could have been hauling bricks of gold and she wouldn't have blinked unless she thought they were hers. That night after dinner, I brought the kids into the living room. Sweethearts, I said gently, Grandma is going to take a little break. I found a cute little apartment near a park, and I'll be living there for a while. Sophia looked confused. Why? Well, I said, keeping my voice steady sometimes. Even grandmas need a little space. Will you still come to my school concert? She asked, voice trembling. Of course I will, I said, hugging her tightly. I'll always be there for the important things. I looked over at Nathan and Vanessa standing in the doorway. Vanessa was expressionless. Nathan looked vaguely embarrassed. I'll still babysit if you ever need me, I added. You only need to ask. They didn't respond. Vanessa turned and walked into the kitchen. Nathan followed. I kissed the kids goodnight and carried one final bag to my car. When I walked back inside to grab my purse, I overheard Vanessa laughing. She finally got the hint, she said. My heart didn't shatter. It hardened. A week later, I was settled into my small apartment. Cozy, quiet, all mine. And something remarkable happened. I found myself waking up without the weight of silent resentment, without waiting for the next passive-aggressive comment, without feeling like a coat draped over someone else's chair. I began researching stock investments again, something I used to love before life had other plans. With the help of my accountant and a few online courses, I crafted a plan, a slow, steady, deliberate investment strategy. Real estate. ETFs, dividend stocks. I had $800,000 in principal. I aimed to turn that into more than just money. I wanted freedom. 2 months later, I stopped by Nathan's house to drop off Sophia's forgotten backpack. Vanessa opened the door. "Oh, hi." I handed her the backpack. "She left this in my car." Before she could close the door, Sophia ran up and hugged me around the waist. "I miss you, Grandma." I squeezed her back, inhaling her vanilla-scented shampoo. "I miss you too." Vanessa cleared her throat. "Well, thanks. We're kind of in the middle of dinner." That was it. That was all I got. I smiled. "Good night, sweetheart," I whispered to Sophia. Back in my car, I sat there for a moment and just breathed. Then I drove to the wine bar near my apartment. It had become my Thursday night ritual. A glass of red, a jazz trio playing soft notes in the corner, and the warm hush of grown-up conversations. I had friends again. Not many, but a few. Women like me who had spent their lives giving, 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 and who were finally learning to take a little back. We laughed that night harder than I had in years. I mentioned the pension and they raised their glasses. One of them joked, "Let me guess, your kid suddenly became nice." I didn't answer. I didn't need to. My smile said enough. They had no idea I'd started something bigger than just a new chapter. I was writing a whole new book. 2 months after I moved out, I received a text from Nathan. "Mom, can you pick the kids up from school?" Vanessa and I both got called into meetings. I stared at the message. There was no "Hi, Mom," no apology, no acknowledgement of the silence that had grown between us. Just a command dressed as a request. I took a long breath. I wasn't angry, but I wasn't the same woman who used to drop everything. "I'm sorry I can't today," I replied. "Hope you find someone." 10 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Nathan. "Are you okay?" He asked, his tone casual, but clearly testing the waters. "I'm fine, Nathan. Just not available right now." There was a pause. "You've always been there for them. This is important. And now I'm teaching them that Grandma has a life too," I said gently. He sighed. "Fine. I'll figure it out." Click. I didn't gloat. I didn't cry. I just smiled. Because that was the first time in years I'd said no and meant it. That evening, I went over my portfolio again. The numbers were modest but encouraging. The compound interest calculators made me feel like a wizard. I'd also started journaling again. Nothing fancy, just a few pages each night about what I noticed, what I felt. A small ritual, like watering the soul. It was around that time I ran into Lydia at the grocery store. She was an old co-worker from my days working at the community library. We hadn't spoken in years. Elaine Winslow," she gasped. I smiled, genuinely surprised. "Lydia, you haven't aged a day." We stood in the aisle for 20 minutes catching up. I told her I was semi-retired. She told me about her divorce, her grown kids, her dreams of moving to the coast. We exchanged numbers. That weekend, she invited me to her book club. I almost declined old habits, but I said yes. The book club was filled with women just like us. Burned out, brushed aside, but still brilliant. We talked about novels, sure. But we also talked about money, investments, freedom. "You should come to the investment brunch," Lydia said the second week. "It's women only, all about reclaiming financial control." I did. And that's when something clicked. Every single woman there had a version of my story. Some were more dramatic, some more subtle. But we all shared the same origin. We gave too much for too long to people who didn't see us. I started speaking more during meetings, sharing what I learned. Before long, women were asking me questions, leaning in, taking notes. They didn't know I had $800,000 invested. They didn't need to, because now I wasn't just rebuilding my life, I was helping others rebuild theirs too. One Sunday after the group brunch, I bumped into Vanessa. She was in line at a trendy cafe, sunglasses on, AirPods, and holding her $9 matcha latte. She saw me and hesitated. Then, surprisingly, she walked over. "Hey," she said, sounding like someone trying to remember how to be polite. I smiled. "Vanessa, how are you?" She shrugged. "Busy? Kids are exhausting." I nodded. "I remember." She looked at me for a long moment. "Listen, Nathan told me about your new place. He said you're investing." I tilted my head. "I am." "Like what?" "Buying stocks, among other things." Her lips parted slightly. There was a flicker of something curiosity, envy. Good for you, she said, then added quickly. Must be nice to have the time. It's not about time, I replied softly. It's about taking back what I gave away for free. Vanessa didn't answer. I didn't expect her to, but I saw her thinking. Later that evening, Nathan called. I've been meaning to ask, he said. How are you affording everything? You're living better now than you did with us. I didn't hesitate. I had savings, I said simply. From what? Your pension. I smiled. Let's just say I planned well. There was silence on the other end. I could almost hear him calculating. Well, that's great, Mom. I'm happy for you. Thank you, I said. I'm happy for me too. I hung up and looked around my apartment, small, yes, but filled with life. Orchids bloomed in the corner. A jazz playlist hummed softly. I had a dinner reservation at a new French restaurant, and afterward a poetry reading by the lake. I was no longer someone's afterthought. I was the headline of my own life. The moment everything truly shifted wasn't when I got the money. It was when I started using it for myself. I remember the day clearly. A gray Tuesday. The kind that usually disappeared into the void of unremarkable weeks. But this one stuck. I had just come back from my monthly brunch with the investment circle. We had discussed real estate investment trusts and how to create passive income streams. The ideas lit a fire in me. I came home, sat down, and made a decision. I wasn't just going to preserve what I had. I was going to grow it. With care, with intelligence, and most importantly, with a kind of quiet pride that came from building something no one believed I could. I met with a financial advisor that Lydia recommended, Travis, a man in his 40s, with a sharp mind and a gentle way of explaining things. Elaine, he said, after going through my numbers, you've done remarkably well for someone with no formal financial background. I suppose I just started paying attention, I said, sipping my coffee. He chuckled. Well, you've clearly got the temperament for it. Long-term discipline. Conservative risk profile. You're exactly the kind of investor who makes real wealth over time. Those words stuck with me. Real wealth. Not flashy. Not for show. Quiet power. I told him I didn't want to buy designer bags or flashy cars. I wanted control. I wanted peace. He nodded. That's what money's for. Over the following weeks, I refined my plan. I allocated funds for long-term index investments, dividend-yielding stocks, and a small portion into ethical tech startups through a female founder platform I discovered. I even created a monthly budget for pure joy, $1,000 to spend guilt-free. Only me. My first purchase was a trip. Paris. I hadn't traveled since my honeymoon 40 years ago. I booked a solo trip, 5 days. A boutique hotel in Le Marais, a food tour, and a ticket to a classical concert at Sainte-Chapelle. When I told Nathan, he blinked. Wait, Paris? As in France? Yes. By yourself? I smiled. Yes. Why? Because I want to, and I can. He was quiet for a long time. I could almost feel the weight of his unspoken thoughts. Who was this version of me? Where did she come from? Meanwhile, Vanessa posted a story on Instagram. Exhausted mom life. Dreaming of travel, but stuck in laundry hell. I didn't react. I just packed my suitcase. Paris was everything I didn't know I'd needed. I wandered the streets without agenda, sat in cafes for hours. I read poetry. I drank wine. I didn't rush. I wasn't waiting for anyone. For once, I didn't feel invisible. I came home different. Not in the way of some cheesy movie montage, but deeply, quietly. Something had clicked. I resumed my routines, but now they had a softness, a freedom. I hosted a dinner for the women from the investment group. I cooked coq au vin, poured Bordeaux lit candles. We shared stories not just about money, but about rediscovery. One woman, Miriam, confessed she hadn't laughed so hard in years. This feels like college, she said. But better, because we don't care what anyone thinks anymore. That night, I journaled this. The opposite of loneliness isn't being surrounded. It's being seen. One morning, months after Paris, I received a call from Nathan again. Hey, Mom. Are you free to babysit next Saturday? I paused. Old instincts flared. Say yes. Drop everything. But I smiled instead. Actually, no. I have a gala that evening. A gala. What kind of gala? Charity event. I was invited by a colleague. Colleague, you're working. I laughed gently. I sit on a board now. Small nonprofit. We're funding financial literacy programs for women over 50. Again, the silence. The recalibration. That's Wow, that's really cool, Mom. Thank you, sweetheart. He was different now. He wasn't mocking me. He wasn't dismissive. He was trying to understand me for the first time in a long time. And that mattered more than any apology. A few days later, I stopped by unannounced. I brought a tin of cookies for the kids. Vanessa opened the door. She looked me up and down. I was wearing my navy wrap dress gold earrings from a Parisian market and a smile that no longer needed permission. You look nice, she said, surprised. I thanked her. When I stepped into the living room, the kids ran to hug me. Their joy was so pure it almost broke me. Nathan walked in from the kitchen. Hey, Mom, he said, suddenly nervous. Actually, we've been meaning to ask you something. I raised an eyebrow. Well, there's this parent-teacher fundraiser, and, we'd love for you to be part of it. Vanessa nodded, her voice quieter now. You're really good at organizing things. We thought maybe you could help. It was the smallest olive branch, but an olive branch nonetheless. I agreed, not because I wanted to go back, but because perhaps for the first time, they were meeting me, not just the version they created, not just Mom or Grandma, but Elaine Winslow. It had been a long time since I was asked to help with something out of respect, rather than obligation. That fundraiser changed more than I expected. The event was a spring-themed garden luncheon at the elementary school with booths, performances, and silent auctions. I volunteered to handle the logistics tables catering donor outreach. I put together a spreadsheet, drafted emails, and within 48 hours, we had confirmed a dozen sponsors and a flower shop that agreed to donate arrangements. Vanessa, to her credit, looked surprised, but impressed. I had no idea you were this thorough, she said, glancing at my event plan. I used to plan international conferences for the Education Bureau, I said mildly. She blinked. You did, I nodded. Back before you met Nathan. And there it was. The seed of a new narrative. For the first time, she didn't counter with something dismissive like, oh, I thought you just stayed home with Nathan. Instead, she nodded slowly, the gears in her mind finally turning in another direction. As the event day approached, I was in my element. I wore a sun hat, coordinated the volunteers, and calmed a parent who panicked because the sandwich trays hadn't arrived yet. The principal approached me during the event. Mrs. Winslow, have you ever considered joining our board of parent advisors? I chuckled. I'm actually quite busy these days. But thank you. The fundraiser was a success. We exceeded the goal by 20%, and every parent left with a small packet of seeds and a handwritten thank you card. Mine said, you brought elegance and order into this chaos. Thank you for being the backbone of this event. Vanessa read it as we drove home. She didn't say much, but she didn't need to. Later that week, I went to a community gathering at the Women's Financial Network. It was a celebrate your wins evening. Everyone brought a story. I shared mine. The $800,000, the betrayal, the Paris trip, the fundraiser. And then one woman asked, but what will you do now? What's the long game? That question lingered. I went home and made tea, sat in the sunroom, looked at my notebook. What was my long game? I didn't want to die with money in a bank account and a handful of thank you cards. I wanted my story to help someone, to become something. That's when I reached out to the local college's community center. I pitched a workshop, Financial Reinvention After 50. They loved the idea. They gave me a small stipend and a classroom. 6 weeks later, I stood in front of 15 women, widows, divorced, retirees, one woman just out of bankruptcy. I opened the class with a simple truth. The most dangerous lie we're told is that it's too late. They leaned in. We talked about saving, budgeting, investment apps, ETFs, building credit. But more than that, we talked about reclaiming our voice, our value. One woman came up after class and said, I used to be afraid of my bank account, but now I feel capable. I felt lighter than I had in years. Meanwhile, Nathan and Vanessa began changing too subtly but surely. They started inviting me to things. school plays, birthday dinners. At one brunch, Vanessa even asked me about a business idea, an online stationery shop. I'm not sure how to budget it, she admitted. Show me your plan, I offered. We sat at the table together, shoulder to shoulder. She listened. She asked questions. She took notes. That moment meant more than any apology. And Nathan? He started hugging me again. Not the stiff pat on the back kind, but real lingering ones. The kind he used to give me when he was 5. One day over coffee, he finally said it. I'm sorry, Mom, for a lot of things. I reached across the table and held his hand. I know. We didn't have to relive it. The acknowledgement was enough. Months passed and my net worth quietly grew. The $800,000 was now nearly $1, 1 million. But more than that, I had grown. One evening, I sat on the patio with Lydia. She poured us wine and said, "You know, I think you're the most dangerous kind of rich person." I raised an eyebrow. "Oh, the kind that doesn't need to prove it. That's terrifying to people." We laughed. But she was right. Wealth isn't just about numbers. It's about knowing who you are, what you can survive, and what you no longer need to tolerate. It's about power, quiet, intentional, not needing a stage. That's when I decided to update my will. I wasn't going to let the cycle repeat, so I made 2 versions, one standard for their eyes, the other sealed to be opened only if I ever sensed betrayal again. It wasn't revenge, it was insurance. Because as much as I loved them, I'd learned this. Forgiveness isn't permission. And trust once broken had to be rebuilt, not assumed. I also started writing my story. For the class. For the next generation. For the woman who might one day sit in her living room, humiliated, hurt, but still breathing and wondering if she could start over. She could. Because I did. The workshop became more than just a class. It became a movement. We started with 15 women, and by the 3rd session we had 25. By the end of the 2nd month, the local library offered to host a weekend seminar, and soon after, the community college invited me to guest lecture at their adult education program. I didn't advertise. I didn't boast. I simply showed up every week with my stack of notes, a warm voice, and a promise. We're going to take back what the world told you you couldn't have. Meanwhile, at home, the shift with Nathan and Vanessa grew more real. Vanessa stopped giving me that default cold smile when I walked in. She started texting me photos of Luke at school, even asking if I could pick him up some days. When she launched her online shop, she sent me a gift. A custom leather planner embossed with my initials. Inside was a note. For the woman who built everything in silence. It hit me harder than I expected. One afternoon, I overheard her talking to a friend on speakerphone in the kitchen. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, I'd just walked in to make tea. She said, "Honestly, I used to think she was just a babysitter with opinions. But now, I think she's probably the smartest person in this house." It was strange to hear someone say that about me. Strange because for so long I'd learned to be small. I didn't interrupt, just poured my tea and smiled quietly. But Nathan still struggled. He had grown up seeing me as his emotional anchor, but not as a person. Not as a woman who had lived through recessions, negotiations, and budget crises. Who had studied in dimly lit college libraries while pregnant. Who had bought her first stock on a whim and then learned how to read quarterly reports like they were maps to treasure. So I decided to invite him to class. He looked surprised. Me. Sit in. Just once. You can leave after 10 minutes if it's boring. He showed up, sat in the back, arms crossed. But by the end of the session, he was leaning forward, scribbling notes. Afterwards, he pulled me aside. "Why didn't you tell me about any of this?" I looked at him, not unkindly. "Would you have listened?" He didn't answer. That was answer enough. He came again and again. Eventually, he said, "You know, we've been thinking about investing for Luke's college fund. Maybe we could—" "I'll help," I said, cutting him off gently. "But I won't do it for you." He nodded. That weekend, we sat around the table, Nathan, Vanessa, and me, with laptops and printouts. I watched them debate the pros and cons of low-fee index funds versus growth ETFs. They asked me questions, listened, took notes. For the first time, I wasn't the family extra. I was the foundation. Then came the real test. One day, while sorting through mail, I found an envelope addressed to Nathan. From a law firm, the same firm that had handled his in-laws' estate. I was about to put it in his stack when instinct made me pause. I didn't open it, but I made a note of the sender. Later, I casually asked, "Everything okay with Vanessa's parents?" He blinked. "Oh yeah, they're just settling some things." "Why?" I smiled. "Just curious." But my stomach had that cold twist again. That night I couldn't sleep. I sat up reading contracts, Googling terms, following my gut. 2 days later, I asked Vanessa directly. "I saw a letter from the Rothman Group. What's it about?" She stiffened. "It's private." I didn't press, just nodded. That weekend, I took Lydia to lunch and told her everything. She raised an eyebrow. "You think they're trying to loop you out of something?" "I think they might be managing an estate. One that included promises made to me before." Lydia sipped her wine. "Want me to call a friend?" I didn't need to say yes. She already had her phone out. Within 72 hours, I had an unofficial confirmation. Vanessa's parents had left a trust. One that included a clause stating that if Luke's primary caregiver, me, had remained in the picture for more than 5 years, she would receive a gift from the trust. That gift, a house, fully paid, but only if I was acknowledged in writing as having played that role. My name, however, had been omitted in the current draft. I sat at my kitchen table staring at the information. And just like that, I understood everything. Why the sudden warmth, the invites, the hugs, the carefully timed affection. It wasn't just growth. It was manipulation. I stood up, walked outside, and looked at the hydrangeas I'd planted. They were blooming now, rich blue proud, resilient, just like me. The next morning, I called my lawyer. "Let's update my trust," I said. "And I want to move a large portion of my portfolio into a foundation, anonymous, with strict oversight." He didn't ask why. 2 days later, I invited Nathan and Vanessa to dinner. I cooked their favorite, lemon-roasted chicken garlic mashed potatoes and green beans with almonds. We sat, we ate, we laughed. Then, as I cleared the plates, I said, "Oh, before dessert, I have something for you." I handed them an envelope. Inside was a letter. It said, "Thank you for finally seeing me. But I've seen you too. This is the last time my worth will be used as leverage. My future and my fortune are no longer available to those who don't recognize them without proof." Vanessa's face drained of color. Nathan looked like he was holding his breath. I brought out the pie. "Pichen, still warm?" We didn't speak much after that, but I slept like a baby that night. The air in the house changed after that dinner. It wasn't just awkward. It was chilled, the kind of cold that settles in silence and tight smiles in doors closed, a little too softly in text messages answered with a single emoji. Vanessa, to her credit, kept up appearances. She still sent me photos of Luke. Still said thank you when I picked him up from school. But the sparkle in her voice was gone. Nathan didn't bring it up at all. No questions. No apologies. Just avoidance, which, if you ask me, is a specialty of men raised by women they underestimated. But I wasn't angry. I wasn't even disappointed. I felt free. And that freedom gave me room to start something new. It began with a message from the public library. "Miss Monroe, would you consider doing a public talk on financial independence for women over 50? I said yes. They scheduled me for a Friday evening in the community room. I expected 20 people, maybe 30. 87 showed up. Some sat on the floor. A few brought their daughters. I opened with, "Ladies, I built $1 million stock portfolio while raising a child and getting mistaken for the help." The room laughed. And then they listened. I told them how I read annual reports in waiting rooms, invested $100 a month into index funds, and learned not to chase hot stocks, but to own slow, patient power. I didn't show off. I showed how. After the talk, a woman with gray curls clutched my hand and said, "I wish you'd been my sister, or my mother." I cried in the car on the way home, not because I was sad, but because I had no idea how much I had craved being heard. That night, I opened a blank document and typed, "The Invisible Millionaire: How I Built Wealth." While they thought I was just the nanny, it became the first line of my book. Self-published, yes, but polished, professional. Lydia helped me design the cover. A former colleague edited the manuscript. I posted about it once on Facebook with no expectation. It sold 10,000 copies in 3 months. Then came an email. Hi, this is Harper Gold from Voices Unheard podcast. We'd love to interview you. I said yes. The episode went viral. From House Helper to Millionaire Mentor was the title. And that's when everything changed. I got messages from women in Detroit, in Manila, in Johannesburg. I listened to your story and opened my first savings account. I thought I was too old to learn money. Now I'm on week 3 of your workbook. My daughter thinks I'm a superhero because of you. And just like that, I became more than a silent success. I became a signal. People asked me if Nathan and Vanessa ever said anything. Well, Vanessa did. She came by one afternoon unannounced, holding a coffee and a book. My book. Can I come in? She asked. I stepped aside. She sat at the kitchen island, flipping the book in her hands. I read it twice, she said. I waited. She looked up, and for the first time in years, I saw the younger woman I once knew. The one who brought me chamomile tea after a stomach bug. The one who held my hand when Luke was born. I was scared, she whispered. I thought, if you had power, I wouldn't have any. I nodded. I understand. But I was wrong. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folder. It's a draft. I'm working on my own business now. I've been using your budget templates. And Luke wants to open a lemonade stand this summer. I smiled. Let's build the stand together. We hugged. We cried. We didn't fix everything. But we started over. Nathan took longer. Men like him take longer. But one day he came home from work holding a copy of Forbes. You're in this, he said. He pointed to a paragraph titled, The Rise of Quiet Power. My name was in the third line. I'm proud of you, Mom, he said. And I'm sorry it took me this long. We sat in silence. Not heavy this time. Just full. Luke burst in from the yard dirt on his knees and a kite in his hand. Grandma, can you help me tie this? Of course, I said. As I knelt to tie the string, I felt it again. That rush of joy that doesn't shout, only breathes. Power. It turns out doesn't always come from the loudest voice or the tallest tower. Sometimes it's in the woman who watches, who waits, who writes checks with her silence and cashes them in wisdom. And sometimes the kite flies higher than anyone expects. 2 months later, I got a call from a woman named Caroline Lang. Miss Monroe, I represent a nonprofit called Legacy Ladder. We empower underrepresented women to gain financial literacy. We'd love for you to keynote our annual conference. I said yes without asking what they paid. Some things you don't do for the money. Others you do because you used to be the woman who needed that voice. The night before the conference, I stood in the hotel bathroom staring at my reflection. 63 years old. Gray streaks I no longer dyed. A silk blouse. A gold watch that had once been my mother's. I didn't look invisible anymore. The ballroom was packed. Over 300 attendees. They gave me a mic, a spotlight, and 30 minutes. I took a breath and opened with, My name is Nora Monroe, and for 20 years I was called just the nanny. Yee. The crowd leaned in. I told them about eating lunch in silence, about being mistaken for the help at school events, about crying into my tea when the family I loved treated me like furniture with a pulse. Then I told them about compound interest, about silent investing, about buying shares of companies I believed in when no one believed in me. You don't need permission to build a future, I said. You only need a plan and a bit of patience. When I stepped off stage, 3 women were crying. One said, My daughter just started her first job. I'm sending her your book tonight. The moment felt surreal. A month later, that nonprofit offered me a board seat. Paid, but I would have done it for free. I accepted. My calendar filled with talks, interviews, emails from readers. Women mailed me handwritten letters from small towns and big cities, telling me I gave them hope. But just as my world expanded, Nathan's began to shrink. His company announced layoffs. He wasn't cut, but the stress followed him home like a shadow. One evening over dinner, he asked me, Mom, how did you manage money so well? I looked at him not with judgment, but with clarity, because I had no backup plan. No one was coming to save me, so I saved myself. He swallowed. I wish I'd listened sooner. I smiled. You still can. The next day, we sat at the kitchen table and reviewed his accounts. I helped him organize a debt payoff plan, start a Roth IRA, and open an emergency fund. I didn't gloat. I guided. It was the first time in his life he looked at me not as a backup, but as a leader. Meanwhile, Luke's lemonade stand became a neighborhood hit. He made $170 in a weekend. I matched it and helped him open a child's savings account. We called it the Big Dreams Jar. I want to buy a telescope, he said. Let's invest toward the stars, I replied. One evening, as we walked home from the bank, he looked up at me and said, Grandma, are you famous? I chuckled. A little bit. He beamed. Cool. It wasn't about the fame. It was about being seen not just by strangers on podcasts or in bookshops, but by the people I raised, the ones who once underestimated the quiet woman in the kitchen. And then a letter arrived. It was from Vanessa's mother, Linda. We'd never been close. She had once years ago whispered at a party that nannies should know their place. But the letter said, Nora, I watched your talk. I cried. I was wrong about you. I hope one day you'll forgive my ignorance. If you're willing, I'd love to meet for tea. I held the letter for 10 minutes before I could move. Forgiveness isn't weakness, it's choice. And I was finally in a place strong enough to choose. We met at a small cafe. She was nervous. I was calm. I thought you were trying to replace me, she admitted. I wasn't, I said. I was just trying to matter. She reached across the table. You always did. I just couldn't see it through my own insecurity. We didn't become best friends, but we became something better. Honest. After that meeting, something in me settled. Not because I needed validation, but because I no longer needed it. Later that week, I sat in my garden as the sun dipped behind the trees, the smell of jasmine hanging in the air, Luke's laughter echoing from the porch. I realized that life doesn't give you closure. You build it one story, one share, one truth at a time. The fall leaves had started turning gold and rust by the time I received a dinner invitation from Nathan and Vanessa. Come early, Nathan said. We want to talk. That alone nearly gave me a heart attack. When a son says we want to talk, it's usually followed by one of two things: a request for money or a revelation that changes everything. Still, I went. Their house looked the same on the outside. On the inside, though, something had shifted. A picture of me and Luke now hung on the living room wall, centered, framed, proud. Not hidden behind school awards or pushed to a side table. That in itself was new. Vanessa greeted me at the door. Her smile was softer, real. Hi, Nora. Not hey, not a stiff nod, but a hello that suggested she'd been practicing it in her head and meant it this time. I stepped in. Dinner was already prepared. Roasted chicken, butternut, squash, red wine breathing in a decanter on the sideboard. They had even set the table with cloth napkins. Luke ran out from his room. Grandma, look at my telescope. He practically tackled me with it, pointing at the lens. I saw Jupiter yesterday. Well, I said, laughing. Did he wave back? Vanessa actually laughed too, and Nathan joined in. For a moment, it felt like a family again. No hierarchy, no silent judgment, just shared warmth. We sat down to eat. About halfway through the meal, Nathan cleared his throat. Mom, we owe you an apology. Vanessa nodded. A big one. I paused. Nathan took my hand. I didn't realize how much I relied on you until I pushed you away. And now that I've seen what you built on your own, I can't stop thinking about all the times I called you just a nanny. I'm so sorry. Vanessa's voice wavered. I saw your talk and read your book. I didn't know you were investing while you were helping us. I didn't even ask. That was wrong. I could see it. The remorse. And the fear that maybe I wouldn't forgive them. But here's what happens when you carry bitterness for too long. It turns your heart into something cramped and calloused. That night, something cracked open. I don't need an apology to love you, I said. But hearing it means more than you know. We sat in silence for a moment, letting that truth breathe. Then Nathan said, We've been thinking Luke will be applying to schools in a few years. He wants to study astronomy. And we were wondering, would you help us plan for that? We want to invest now smartly. He reached into a drawer and pulled out a folder. It was filled with spreadsheets, budget breakdowns, investment strategies printed from online resources. They had even opened a 529 plan. They weren't asking for my money. They were asking for my wisdom. That more than anything brought tears to my eyes. I'd be honored, I said. After dinner, we moved to the porch. The three of us, me, Nathan, and Vanessa, sipping wine, watching Luke adjust his telescope. Vanessa turned to me and asked, "How did you start investing, really?" So I told her about the time I found a torn Wall Street journal in a trash bin years ago, about using the public library's internet to research index funds, about scraping $20 here, $30 there, about choosing long-term gains over instant gratification. She listened intently. "You weren't just surviving. You were building while I was judging you." I shrugged. Judgment is easy when people are quiet. But sometimes the quiet ones are carrying the heaviest wisdom. Then she did something I never expected. She took off the necklace she always wore, a small locket I'd seen for years, and handed it to me. "I know this doesn't fix the past," she said, "but I want you to have this." It was my mother's. "I think you deserve it more now." My hand trembled slightly as I took it. Sometimes the hardest thing isn't building wealth, it's being seen as worthy once you have it. Later that week, Nathan emailed me a full financial plan with the subject line, "Nora's Blueprint." Underneath the title he'd written, "Built from watching the strongest woman I know." I didn't cry, but I did close my laptop and just sat there for a while, soaking in the echo of those words. It's easy to vanish in someone else's narrative, but when you rewrite your own page by page eventually, they can't help but read it. And sometimes they ask for a copy. The next few weeks felt like I was walking through an entirely different house. Not because Nathan and Vanessa had changed the furniture, but because something deeper had shifted, something unspoken. Vanessa began inviting me over for small things. Dinner on Tuesdays, Luke's soccer games on weekends, even a baking day, where we tried and failed to make croissants from scratch. We laughed, made a mess, and for the first time I saw her without her guarded armor. She asked about my past, and I told her things I hadn't shared with anyone in years. Like how I used to wake up at 4 a.m. to clean offices before arriving at their house, cheeks still flushed from the cold. How I bought my first ETF after 3 months of stashing grocery coupons and pocketing the savings. How I never bought myself new clothes unless the seams of my old ones gave out entirely. And how one morning I'd looked at the balance in my brokerage account and whispered, "You're going to be free, Nora, someday," Vanessa cried. "I had no idea," she whispered. "I just thought you were trying to keep your life simple." I smiled gently. "Sometimes silence isn't simplicity, it's strategy." She nodded as if tasting the weight of that truth. Then came the moment I didn't expect. Nathan pulled me aside one afternoon after helping Luke with his science fair project. "Mom," he said, "I have a question that might sound odd." I braced myself. "Would you consider doing a video interview with Luke for his school's Influential Figures project?" My eyes widened. "He wants to present someone who's inspired him," Nathan explained. "And he chose you." Me, the woman who spent years cleaning floors and folding laundry in their guest room, the nanny they once barely acknowledged at the dinner table. I said yes, of course, but inside I was trembling. Luke prepared questions like a little journalist. "What inspired you to start investing? Were you ever afraid you wouldn't make it? Do you still think about those hard days? What's your proudest moment?" He recorded the interview on an iPad with Nathan helping as cameraman and Vanessa beaming in the background. When it ended, Luke hugged me so tightly I nearly lost my breath. "You're my hero," he whispered. I'll never forget those words. Later that night, Vanessa texted me a link to the video. Luke had edited it himself, complete with a title screen. "My Grandma, the Millionaire Who Made It All Herself." I watched it 3 times in a row, sobbing quietly. Not because of the title, but because of how he spoke about me. "She was never just our nanny," he said in the voiceover. "She was the architect of her own freedom. And now she's building it for us, too." That weekend, they invited me on a surprise outing. They took me to the local university where Luke wanted to study astronomy. Nathan handed me an envelope. "We opened a college fund," he said, "and we'd like you to be part of the board, managing it. With your knowledge and track record, we trust you more than anyone." I opened the envelope. Inside was a ledger with a starting balance. $50,000. "It's not much yet," Vanessa said, "but we're serious. We want to learn, and we want to build like you did." I smiled. They weren't just making amends. They were asking me to lead, to shape something lasting. to pass on what I had fought so hard to learn in silence. Later that evening, I sat alone on my porch with a glass of tea watching the sky turn violet and silver. I remembered every long night I'd stayed up reading investment books by flashlight. Every time I'd skipped a meal to stash $10 more into a fund. Every moment I'd been underestimated, overlooked, dismissed. And I realized something profound. Revenge doesn't always come as fireworks. Sometimes it arrives as legacy. Sometimes it's your name, written on the corner of a school project titled Influential Figures. Sometimes it's a seat at the table finally offered with love and respect. And sometimes it's watching the very people who once called you just a nanny, now seeing you as something entirely different. A compass, a builder, a matriarch, one who made it and brought them along. I didn't think anything could top the moment I saw Luke's school project video. But life has a strange way of layering moments like brush strokes in a painting you never meant to start. A few weeks later, I got a call from Luke's school. His teacher, Miss Hendricks, wanted to meet me. I thought something was wrong. Instead, she smiled warmly when I arrived and led me into the school auditorium. There on the stage was a giant banner, Family Inspiration Night. Real stories, real heroes. Luke had nominated me to speak. At first I tried to decline. Public speaking wasn't something I'd ever enjoyed. But Luke clutched my hand and whispered, "You already lived the hard part. Now you just have to tell the truth." So I did. Standing in front of 50 students and their families, I shared my story not with drama or flair, but with honesty. I told them how I'd come to this country with 2 suitcases and a head full of dreams. How I'd cleaned homes, taken care of children, and worked weekends just to survive. How I'd watched people throw away opportunities I could only pray for. And how slowly, methodically, I turned every forgotten dollar into freedom. I explained how I studied index funds in library corners. How I learned about compound interest from pamphlets. How I asked questions, made mistakes, and started again. And then I said the one sentence that made the room fall silent. I was called just a nanny, but I was also building $1 million future in silence. Parents in the crowd looked at each other. Some smiled. A few had tears in their eyes. When I finished, I didn't expect applause. But the room erupted. Later, a mother approached me. She looked exhausted. Mascara-smudged hair tied in a haphazard bun. "I'm a cleaner," she said quietly. I never thought about saving anything. I didn't know where to start. I squeezed her hand. "Start with believing you're worth saving for," she cried in my arms. From that day on, something shifted not just in my family, but in the community. Miss Hendricks invited me to speak again, this time for Career Day. I found myself mentoring 2 high school seniors interested in finance. Vanessa set up a blog for me, Nora's Notes, a place where I could write in simple terms what I wished I had known earlier. I didn't expect it to take off. But by the second week, I had 12,000 subscribers. Some called me the invisible investor. Others said, "You're the voice I needed 10 years ago." Nathan started editing my posts. Vanessa created visuals. Luke would sneak in and read comments aloud, laughing and crying at the same time. "Grandma," he said one night, "you're famous." I shook my head. "I'm just loud in the quiet now." Then came an email that left me breathless. A national women's magazine wanted to feature me in a series called Unsung Architects. They didn't want glamour. They wanted truth. We scheduled the shoot in my living room, surrounded by the same secondhand furniture I'd kept since the beginning. The photographer asked, "Can we take one picture with your journal?" I nodded, handing over the tattered leather-bound notebook that held every stock purchase, every side gig, every personal note I'd ever written about finance. She clicked, then paused. "What's the most important lesson you learned?" I smiled. "That silence isn't weakness, it's wealth waiting to be born." When the feature went live, everything exploded. I got calls from podcasts, interview requests from universities, even an invitation to speak at a women's conference. But the moment that truly broke me, a letter arrived from my old neighbor, Mrs. Davenport, the one who'd once said I didn't look like the kind of person who belonged on a homeowner's board. She wrote, "Nora, I see you now. I'm sorry it took so long. I hope you'll forgive my blindness. I'd be honored if you'd speak to our community group this fall." I wept holding that letter, not because I needed her apology, But because acknowledgement, even late, has a strange power, it doesn't erase the past, but it rewrites its echoes. That weekend, we celebrated with a small dinner at Nathan's house. Just the five of us. No big speeches. No fanfare. Just Luke making a homemade cake that sank in the middle, Nathan burning the garlic bread, and Vanessa laughing so hard she dropped a wine glass. It was messy, imperfect. But it was family. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like an outsider peeking through the window. I was at the table, not because I bought my way in, not because I demanded it, but because they saw me now. The whole me, not just the woman who folded towels, but the one who in silence built a life and used it to lift others. I never thought my story would carry beyond my own walls, let alone be heard by strangers across the country. But somehow that's what happened. One quiet decision at a kitchen table, buying one share of a simple stock, had spiraled into something I never planned. Visibility. With the magazine article, Nora's Notes blog, and local speaking events, I began to receive handwritten letters. Not emails, actual letters. From women like me, invisible women, forgotten women, strong women. They weren't writing to praise me. They were writing because someone finally sounded like them. There was Maria, a lunch lady in New Mexico, who had squirreled away $10 a week for 12 years and wanted to know if she should move her savings out of her bank into something with more courage. There was Jean, a grandmother who lived with her son and his family, but felt like a ghost in her own home. She wrote, "I feel like I'm walking on eggshells just to exist." And then there was Deirdre, a 23-year-old nanny in New Jersey, who ended her note with, "I read your story, and for the first time I didn't feel stupid." These letters became my new ritual. I'd wake early, pour myself some tea, and answer as many as I could. I didn't offer financial advice. I wasn't a licensed expert. But I could offer something far more rare: presence. I told them what I had done, what I had learned, where I'd fallen, and where I got back up. Meanwhile, Vanessa suggested I publish a small book, a collection of my thoughts from the blog. Nathan offered to help edit it, and when I laughed, saying I was too old to be a published author, Luke shrugged and said, "Too old. Grandma, you're just getting good." So we did it. Silent Wealth. Stories from the Invisible Investor was a thin, humble paperback. We self-published. We didn't expect much. But within the first month, it hit the top 10 in personal finance memoirs on a major online retailer. That's when the news came. A major publisher had read my blog and wanted to sign a full book deal. They wanted me to write about how I had done it, my method, my mindset, and especially how I did it with so little. I was stunned. Me, the woman who used to count every coin before buying groceries, now being asked to teach others. It felt surreal. But something deeper happened at home. Nathan started asking me things not just about money, but about values. He'd been offered a big promotion at his company, but it would come with relocation and travel. He sat at the table twirling a spoon in his coffee and asked, "What would you do?" "About the job," I asked. "No," he said. "About missing your child's life chasing it." My throat caught. I remembered the years I'd spent working while he slept, or while he was away at college, or the nights he didn't come home because he was angry I couldn't pay for things like his friends' parents could. I remembered all of it. "I'd choose presence," I said, "even if it's smaller." He nodded slowly, then surprised me. "I declined the job. I don't want to blink and find out Luke's grown." I couldn't help it. Tears welled in my eyes. Not because of the decision, but because he asked me. For years I'd been background noise. Now he wanted my opinion before a life decision. Vanessa, too, began to shift. One evening, she sat next to me as we packed envelopes of book orders. "I used to resent you," she said softly. "I know," I replied. "No, I resented your peace. You never got ruffled. Even when I was short with you. Even when I judged you. You just kept going. And I hated how steady you were, because it made me feel chaotic." I reached over and touched her hand. "Peace looks like weakness to people still wrestling with their storms." She laughed gently. "That's a very you thing to say." We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Some cracks are best mended in silence, not words. A few weeks later, I was invited to appear on a daytime talk show. The host had read my story and wanted me to join a segment on unseen heroes. I stood in the green room dressed in a simple navy dress Luke picked out for me, staring at the lights beyond the stage. The producer asked me, "Are you nervous?" I shook my head. "No, I've had harder days." When I walked out, the audience applauded. But I didn't look at them. I looked straight into the camera and began not with a clever quote, but with a story. My name is Nora Weston, and I was the nanny everyone ignored. The woman everyone dismissed, the background character in my own life. But in silence, I built something. Something that spoke louder than all their noise combined. When I finished, the applause came again. But this time, it wasn't for me. It was for every person like me watching from home. Every janitor, every cook, every grandparent raising children. Every invisible investor building a life in the dark, praying for a sliver of light. That night, as we celebrated with takeout at home, no champagne, just fried rice and fortune cookies. Luke cracked his cookie open and read it aloud. "What others overlook is your treasure in disguise." He grinned. "That's you, Grandma." Maybe it was. Or maybe I just stopped waiting to be noticed and started seeing myself. 3 weeks after my talk show appearance, I got a letter. An actual letter addressed in careful cursive and postmarked from somewhere in Nebraska. It was from a woman named Joan, 74 years old. She wrote, "Nora, I have been a caregiver, a cook and a cleaner, all my life. I don't even own the house I live in. My daughter does. And when I watched you on television, I felt something I haven't felt in years. Hope. You reminded me that quiet doesn't mean worthless." I held that letter in my lap for a long time. Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I cried. Not from pain, but from release. From the sheer aching realization that for so long, I had equated invisibility with failure. But I was never invisible to the right people. And that mattered more. Still, something else happened after that show. Something that pulled me back into the storm. Nathan's sister Mindy reached out. We hadn't spoken in years. Ever since the family reunion incident when she referred to me as the live-in babysitter who overstayed her welcome. She sent a message that said, "Saw you on TV. Seems you were hiding your real self. I guess we underestimated you. Call me?" I didn't call. Some doors stay closed for a reason. But it sparked a conversation with Nathan and Vanessa. That evening, they sat me down at the kitchen table like I was the guest of honor. Vanessa poured tea. Nathan cleared his throat. "Mom, we've been talking, and we realize we took advantage of you. You weren't just helping out. You were the reason we survived those first few years as parents. And we didn't see it." I sipped my tea and waited. "We want to do something for you," Vanessa added. "Something real." They handed me a document. A deed. They had transferred the title of the guest house on their property to me. Not just to live in, but to own. "It's yours, Mom," Nathan said. "Fully. No conditions." I blinked. "Why?" He chuckled. "Because no one deserves to have to prove they matter to their own family." That night, I walked through the small guest house behind their home. My new home. It wasn't grand, but it was mine. I stood in the middle of the living room and said aloud, "Thank you, Nora." I wasn't thanking anyone else, just me, for not giving up, for staying the course, for believing quietly that dignity didn't have to come with noise. A few months later, I was invited to deliver a commencement speech at a local community college. Not for finance students, but for the Adult Learners Program. There I was in front of hundreds of non-traditional students, single mothers, returning veterans, janitors, and kitchen workers, all graduating with their GEDs or associate degrees. I looked into their faces and told them, "You will be underestimated. You will be ignored. And sometimes you will be mocked. But none of that changes the value of what you're building." They only laugh because they don't understand silent power. After the speech, a woman in her 60s hugged me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. She whispered I got my degree so I could apply for a promotion my boss said I'd never earn. "I'm going back Monday. Wish me luck." Don't wish, I told her. No. By then, Silent Wealth had sold over 70,000 copies. Nathan took a sabbatical from his job to help me manage speaking engagements and book-related events. Luke had taken to calling himself Grandma's unofficial agent. Vanessa began offering free childcare at some of my events to help women who otherwise couldn't attend. Our family had become something new, not perfect, but aware, awake, apologetic in the best way, not with words, but with action. One afternoon, while reorganizing boxes in my new home, I found my first journal. The one I'd used when I first began researching stocks all those years ago. Inside the front cover, I had scribbled something I barely remembered writing. I'm going to learn what they think I can't. I ran my hand over the faded ink and smiled. I had. Not for revenge, not for glory, but to prove to myself that I was still alive inside. That even in the quiet corners of a life dismissed, there could be growth, power, and abundance. A few weeks later, I received an invitation. The White House was hosting a forum on financial empowerment for underserved women. I was on the list of speakers. I didn't believe it at first. Thought it was a mistake. But when I arrived and saw my name printed in bold letters on the agenda, I knew. It wasn't a mistake. It was a milestone. As I took my seat in the grand historic room, I looked around at all the women beside me. Some CEOs, some teachers, some survivors. We weren't supposed to be here. But we had arrived through quiet exits and back doors and long nights. And now we stood beneath crystal chandeliers, ready to speak into the rooms that once silenced us. My name was called. I rose from the velvet-lined chair and walked slowly, deliberately toward the podium. My heels clicked against the marble floor, a sound that once might have intimidated me. Now it felt like punctuation, like truth arriving one step at a time. The room hushed. I adjusted the microphone, glanced at the teleprompter, then looked up. My name is Nora Whitmore, I began. And for over 20 years, I was just the nanny. A ripple of silence spread across the audience. I wiped noses and folded laundry. I cut crusts off sandwiches and mended broken toys. I picked up after people who never saw me as anything more than background. I paused. But while they dismissed me, I was watching, learning, growing. Somewhere in the back, a woman gave a soft yes. I read financial reports on my lunch breaks. I took online classes after bedtime stories. I started with one index fund, then two, then stocks, bonds, quiet things, invisible things, things that built themselves while everyone looked the other way. A flicker of recognition crossed the faces in the room. I did it in silence because I had been taught to believe I was too small to be loud. But you don't have to be loud to be dangerous. I let that land. I built a portfolio worth over $1 million, not because I wanted revenge, but because I wanted to remember that I was still mine, that my time and my labor had value even if no one else could see it. The cameras didn't intimidate me. The national seal behind me didn't rattle me. What I felt was something far more overwhelming. Peace. A grounded, unshakable peace. When I returned home that night, Luke greeted me with a hand-drawn picture of me standing on a stage, little stars twinkling above my head. "Grandma, you look like magic," he said. I taped it to the fridge. Vanessa came into the kitchen with a bottle of sparkling cider and 3 glasses. To Nora, she said, raising hers, "For teaching us all how to listen. Not just hear, but listen." We clinked glasses, and Nathan added, "To the loudest silence the world never saw coming." After the toast, I stepped out to the back porch, the night air cool against my skin. I looked up at the stars and thought of all the women like me who had made themselves small to survive, who had whispered their dreams into pillowcases, who had traded applause for stability. And I thought, let them call you just a nanny. Let them call you just a housekeeper. Let them call you just a woman. You are a storm disguised as stillness. You are a fortune buried in plain sight. And one day they will realize they were never looking close enough. Some stories end with fireworks. Mine ended with a whisper loud enough to change everything. The truth is, I didn't need them to applaud me. I only needed to prove to myself that the silence I lived in wasn't empty. It was fertile, full of strategy, intention, and quiet power. In a world that equates loud with strong, I proved that dignity doesn't demand a stage. It builds one. And now, every time someone tells me I was just I look them in the eye and say, no, you were never just anything. You are becoming. So follow the channel if you too have ever been dismissed, belittled, or unseen. Here, every whisper counts. And the next story may just be yours. Come back tomorrow. Another voice is waiting.